The year is 2026. Nicolás Maduro sits in a holding cell in Brooklyn, New York. The world watches and calls it justice. They say Delta Force took him down. They say it was politics, pressure, and power. But here's what they won't tell you on the evening news. The handcuffs that locked around his wrists on January 3rd weren't forged in Washington. They were forged in Caracas 10 years ago in the balance sheets of a dying nation. Maduro didn't fall because of a coup. He fell because the ledger closed. He fell because you cannot rule a country when the cash runs out. This is not a story about ideology. This is a story about insolvency. This is the economy that nailed Maduro. Picture Venezuela in the year 2000. Not the Venezuela you see today, but the Venezuela that was. A nation sitting on liquid gold. 300 billion barrels of proven oil reserves. The largest stockpile on planet Earth. Bigger than Saudi Arabia. Bigger than Russia. Bigger than the United States. The beaches were paradise. The land was fertile. The cities gleamed. The people were educated, hopeful, alive. This was the nation that should have been the richest in South America. This was the nation that should have built schools, hospitals, and highways that would last 1,000 years. But that's not what happened. Instead, Venezuela became the greatest economic suicide in modern history. It didn't just go broke. It deleted 80% of its economy in a single decade. It turned doctors into dishwashers and teachers into refugees. It made a cup of coffee cost $3 million. How do you lose $100 billion without building a single bridge? How do you starve while sitting on an ocean of oil? Today we're going to find out. Let's start with the trap, the addiction that killed the nation before Maduro ever sat in the president's chair. It's called Dutch disease, and it's as deadly as it sounds. When you make so much money selling oil, your currency gets strong. That makes imports dirt cheap. Why grow tomatoes in Venezuela when you can buy them from Colombia for pennies? Why manufacture cars when you can import Toyotas for half the price? So Venezuela stopped making things. They stopped farming. They stopped building. They just pumped oil, sold it, and bought everything else. It worked fine when oil was $100 a barrel. It was a party. A drunken, endless, beautiful party. But every party ends. And when this one ended, there was nothing left. No farms, no factories. No backup plan. Just an economy built entirely on one product. One price. One fragile, dangerous dependency. Hugo Chavez understood this trap, but he didn't care. He spent the oil money like it would never run out. He funded social programs, subsidies, and loyalty payments. He bought the military. He bought the poor. He bought time. And when he died in 2013, he left Nicolás Maduro holding a ticking time bomb. The oil infrastructure was already rotting. Years before, the government had fired nearly 20,000 engineers and geologists from PDVSA, the state oil company. Why? Because they went on strike. They were replaced by political loyalists, people who knew how to chant slogans but had no idea how to maintain high-pressure subterranean pipelines. The rigs were rusting. The pumps were leaking. The refineries were breaking down, but Maduro needed the cash. So instead of fixing the infrastructure, he raided it. He treated PDVSA like a personal ATM. Need money for a rally? Take it from the oil company. Need to pay off a general? Take it from the oil company. Maintenance budget? Delete it. This was the first nail in the coffin. When Maduro took office in 2013, Venezuela was pumping nearly 3 million barrels a day. By 2020, that number had collapsed to 337,000. Imagine you own a bakery. You stop buying flour. You fire the bakers. You sell the ovens for scrap metal. Then you act surprised when you have no bread to sell. That was the Maduro economic doctrine. He killed the golden goose, plucked it, deep-fried it, and wondered why it stopped laying eggs. But the real killer wasn't just the production collapse. It was what came next. Because when the oil money stopped flowing in 2014, Maduro had a choice. Cut spending or print money. He chose the money printer. And that's when the economy went from sick to dead. The year is 2014. Oil prices crash. The government ATM runs dry. Maduro has billions in bills to pay. Social programs, subsidies, debt, and most importantly, the loyalty of the military. A normal government would raise taxes or cut spending. Maduro looked at the central bank and said, "Print it." This wasn't just inflation. This was hyperinflation. This was economic velocity that broke the speedometer. In 2013, inflation was 56%, bad but manageable. By 2015, it hit 180%. By 2016, 254%. And then the dam broke. In 2018, the IMF estimated inflation hit 130,000%. Some estimates for early 2019 put it over 300,000%. Let me put that in perspective. You go to sleep on Monday, and an egg costs $1. By Friday, that egg costs $3,000. Prices weren't changing by the year or the month. They were changing by the hour. Waiters in restaurants wouldn't give you a menu with prices. Why? Because by the time you finished your appetizer, the price of the steak had doubled. The currency, the Bolívar, became literally worthless. It was cheaper to use the bills as napkins than to buy napkins with them. People started weaving purses out of the cash because the craft value was higher than the face value. Children used stacks of bills as building blocks. Street vendors refused to accept it. Think about the scale of that. The government destroyed the one thing an economy needs to survive: trust. Trust that this piece of paper is worth something. Trust that if I sell a shoe today, I can buy bread tomorrow. Maduro took that trust and set it on fire. By destroying the currency, he turned every transaction into a panic attack. People spent their paychecks the second they got them, buying anything: tires, rice, bleach, because holding money was like holding melting ice. And what was Maduro's response? Did he admit the mistake? No. He declared an economic war. He blamed shopkeepers. He blamed the CIA. He blamed capitalist parasites. He sent the military to force shopkeepers to lower prices. "Sell this TV for $10, the soldiers would say. So the shopkeepers sold the TV for $10. And then he had no money to buy a new TV to sell. The shelves went empty. This was the second nail. The destruction of price. An economy is a conversation. It's a million people making deals, trading value, building trust. When you destroy the currency, you destroy the language. You turn the conversation into screaming. And when people can't trade, they starve. In 2016, a dark joke started circulating on the streets of Caracas. It was called the Maduro diet. The punchline? It gets you skinny, but it doesn't make you fit. It wasn't funny. But when you're starving, humor is the only nutrient you have left. According to the Encovi survey, A major university study in Venezuela in 2016 alone, nearly 75% of the population lost an average of 19 pounds. Not because they were hitting the gym, but because they were skipping meals. This was the third meal. The weaponization of scarcity. When the economy crashed, the supermarket shelves went bare, but the government found a solution. They created something called the clap boxes, local committees for supply and production. This cardboard box became the most powerful political tool in the country. It was a subsidized food package delivered directly to households. On paper, it sounds like a relief effort. In reality, it was a leash. If you protested against Maduro, no box for you. If you didn't sign the party list, no box for you. If you lived in a neighborhood that voted for the opposition, maybe the truck breaks down that week. But the forensic audit gets darker. This wasn't just about control. It was about theft. Remember a guy named Alex Saab? He was Maduro's financial fixer. The guy who was swapped in a prisoner exchange with the U.S. back in 2023. Investigations revealed that the government was importing low-quality food, often unfit for human consumption, at massive markups. They were buying powdered milk from Mexico that had virtually no nutritional value, billing the Venezuelan state millions for it, and pocketing the difference. While Venezuelan children were fainting in schools from malnutrition, the regime's inner circle was getting rich off the very hunger they created. They turned starvation into a business model. Think about the level of cynicism required for that. You destroy the farms so people can't grow food. You destroy the currency so they can't buy food. And then you say, "Don't worry, I'll feed you if you kneel." This economic crime did something the opposition parties never could. It broke the spirit of the working class. You can't fight a revolution on an empty stomach. But hunger wasn't the only weapon, because when you destroy an economy, people don't just sit and wait to die, they run. And that's exactly what happened. Since 2014, roughly 7.7 million Venezuelans have fled the country. That's about 25% of the entire population. Let me contextualize that for you. Imagine if every single person in Texas just left, or if the entire country of Switzerland packed up and moved. This is the largest displacement crisis in the history of the Western Hemisphere, bigger than Syria at points. And unlike Syria, there was no foreign invasion. There were no bombs falling. The bomb was the economic policy. And who left? Everyone. But specifically the people you need to run a country. Doctors, engineers, teachers, oil technicians. Picture a hospital in Caracas in 2019. The power goes out because the electrical grid failed. The backup generator doesn't work because the parts were stolen. And the surgeon? He's not there. He's in Miami washing dishes because his surgeon's salary in Venezuela dropped to $6 a month. This was the fourth nail, the human capital hemorrhage. Maduro didn't just lose money. He lost the brains to fix the money. When the oil rigs broke down, the guys who knew how to fix them were in Houston. When the power grid collapsed, the electrical engineers were in Madrid. He was left ruling a country of ghosts and the elderly. The desperation reached biblical proportions. Hundreds of thousands of people walked through the Darien Gap, one of the most dangerous jungles on earth, just for a chance to get to the U.S. border. This mass exodus did two things. It relieved pressure initially, fewer mouths to feed. But eventually, it humiliated the regime on the global stage. You can scream socialist paradise all you want. But when a quarter of your population would rather risk death in a jungle than stay in your paradise, the verdict is already in. The economy didn't just drive them out. It exiled them. And now those millions of voices in the diaspora became the loudest lobby against him. They were the ones sending remittances back home, literally keeping their families alive with $20 transfers, while simultaneously begging the world to intervene. But if you think the people leaving was the end of the collapse, you're missing the loudest crash of all. The moment the lights went out, literally, March 2019, you're in an elevator on the 20th floor, or you're on a subway train deep underground, or you're a surgeon, scalpel in hand, about to make an incision. And then click, Venezuela went dark, not for an hour, not for a day. For nearly a week, this was the great blackout. The Guri Dam, one of the largest hydroelectric plants in the world, which supplies 80% of the country's power, failed. Why? Was it an electromagnetic pulse weapon fired by space aliens? According to Maduro, yes. He blamed a cybernetic attack orchestrated by the U.S. and Senator Marco Rubio. He literally claimed they hacked the dam from a laptop in Washington. But the engineers, the few who were left, knew the truth. Negligence. They stopped cutting the grass around the substations, leading to fires. They stopped replacing the turbines. They let the system rot until it simply gave up. This was the fifth nail, the infrastructure apocalypse. It wasn't just the lights. When the power died, the water pumps stopped. You're in a tropical country. 90 degrees Fahrenheit. No air conditioning, no fans. And now no water coming out of the tap. People were seen scooping water from the Gare River, a river so polluted it's basically liquid sewage, just to flush their toilets or wash their clothes. But the true horror was in the hospitals. Neonatal incubators turned off. Dialysis machines stopped. We will never know the exact death toll of those 5 days. But doctors reported patients dying simply because the machines keeping them alive had no juice. This was the moment the economy stopped being about numbers and became a physical threat to life. The state had failed to provide the two most basic things a civilization needs: light and water. And yet, in a twist of irony that would make a Hollywood writer blush, the regime found a way to survive. They realized the Bolivar was dead. So to stay in power, they had to embrace the one thing they hated most, the U.S. dollar. By 2020, Venezuela was officially the twilight zone. Walk down one street and you see people digging through trash bags for food. Walk down the next street and you see a shiny new store called a Bodegon selling Nutella, Kirkland Signature Vitamins, PlayStation 5 South, and imported champagne. This was the sixth nail, the zombie economy. After years of screaming Yankee go home, Maduro did the unthinkable. He quietly legalized the U.S. dollar. He stopped trying to control the exchange rate because he literally couldn't anymore. He let the dollar flow. Suddenly, Venezuela became a two-tier society. Tier 1, the 95% of people earning bolivars worth nothing. Tier 2, the 5%, government cronies, military generals, and people with family abroad who had dollars. This created a bubble of luxury in Caracas. New restaurants opened with $100 steaks. Casinos reopened. It gave the illusion that things were getting better. Look, the influencers said, Venezuela is fixed. But it was a mirage. It was an economy built on money laundering and remittances. The government wasn't producing anything. They were just washing dirty cash through luxury imports. But wait, If the oil industry was dead and they weren't collecting taxes, where was the regime getting the actual cash to buy loyalty? How do you pay a general to keep him from arresting you? You turn to the oldest currency in the world, gold. When the oil dried up, Maduro looked at a map of the Venezuelan Amazon, one of the most biodiverse places on the planet, and said, "Dig it up." He created the Orinoco mining Arco Minero, a zone bigger than Portugal, opened up for gold mining. But this wasn't industrial mining with safety standards. This was the Wild West. This was the seventh nail, the gangster economy. The regime handed control of these mines to a mix of the military and actual criminal syndicates, including Colombian guerrillas like the ELN. They use mercury, poisonous toxic mercury, to separate the gold from the dirt. That mercury flows into the rivers, poisoning the water for indigenous tribes and killing the fish. The gold is then flown out, often on private planes, to places like Turkey, the UAE, or Iran. It's sold for cash. Off the books. No receipts. No taxes. Just bags of cash delivered to the presidential palace to keep the inner circle happy. This is the key point. By 2024 and 2025, Venezuela was no longer functioning as a state. It was a criminal enterprise wearing a flag. The economy wasn't built on productivity or GDP. It was built on extraction. Extract the oil, then the gold. Then the money sent home by migrants. Then, finally, extract hope itself. But even criminal systems have limits. Eventually, there's nothing left to steal and no one left willing to protect you. That's where the final months begin. The election that wasn't, and the decision that sealed the trap shut. In late 2023 and early 2024, a narrative quietly emerged. Venezuela might be stabilizing. Inflation slowed slightly. Oil exports ticked up after the U.S. eased sanctions under the Chevron license. Then came the Barbados Agreement. The offer was clear. Hold a free election in July 2024, and sanctions would be lifted. The economy could breathe again. July 28, 2024 was the day Venezuela could have been saved. The opposition candidate, Edmundo Gonzalez, didn't just win, he crushed it. Exit polls showed a landslide. Maduro had a choice: accept defeat and negotiate survival, or steal the vote and condemn the country to permanent isolation. He chose theft. The deals were canceled. Sanctions snapped back. Investors fled. And in that moment, Maduro proved something fatal to his own military. As long as he remained in power, Venezuela would never make money again. He wasn't the solution. He was the blockage. And when a leader becomes economically radioactive, loyalty doesn't disappear, it corrodes. When the oil economy collapsed and gold could no longer cover the gap, the state turned to South America's most profitable commodity, cocaine. That was the final nail, the criminalization of the government itself. For years, U.S. investigators tracked the Cartel of the Suns, named after the sun insignias worn by Venezuelan generals. The accusation was simple and devastating. The state became the logistics department for drug trafficking. When you control the radar, the ports, and the airspace, crime stops hiding. It governs. But a narco state is unstable by nature. It attracts attention. The U.S. Department of Justice stopped viewing Maduro as a president and started treating him like El Chapo. A May $15 million bounty turned him into a walking lottery ticket. Every guard became a question mark. Loyalty in a bankrupt system has a price, and that price was suddenly very tempting. By late 2025, the money was running out. Payments to generals arrived late or lighter than before. Drug routes were intercepted. Gold output fell. The incentive structure flipped. Protect Maduro and sink with him, or hand him over and survive. When U.S. forces moved in, they didn't face a regime ready to die. They faced one already hollowed out. The economy didn't just weaken Maduro, it stripped him of his shield. In the end, it wasn't ideology that defeated him. It was math. And math always wins.